Hello and welcome to The Appetite, a podcast brought to you by Opal Food and Body Wisdom, an eating disorder treatment center in Seattle, Washington. I'm your host, Carter Umhau, a therapist, artist, and writer. The Appetite is all about issues of food, body, sport, and mental health. And today I'm talking with two out of the three Opal co-founders, Dr. Lexi Giblin and Julie Church, and we're going to be exploring Prochaska's stages of change. In talking about issues of food, body, sport, mental health, all the things I just listed, change is at the heart of all of those things. There's no way to escape it. It is the human condition to change. And yet somehow we're maybe not so good at it. So today we're going to be exploring what it looks like to change and how that process works or doesn't work, maybe. Hi, Lexi and Julie.
Hello.
Hi.
So, Lexi, can you lay this out for us? What are these stages of change and how were they developed?
Yes. So this work is Prochaska and DiClemente's work from the 70s and 80s originally. And they talked about 5 main stages of change that we are in our process, in our processes. The first stage of change is pre-contemplation. And this is where you're not aware of the problem so much, or you're not seeing it as a problem. You're not yet considering making a change because there's no needed change to be had. So you're early in the change process.
I like that title even assumes that there will be contemplation, though, because some people just stay in denial.
I was going to say, is it a denial?
Yeah. I was going to say, where does denial fit here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
It's not on the map.
Not on the map yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next stage is contemplation, where you start to think about the pros and cons of changing, and you toy around with the idea of what it would be like to make this behavior change or this change. And you sort of have a lot of ambivalence, which is really what we consider the hallmark of change. Because in pre-contemplation, you're not ambivalent. You're not in conflict about it. There's no dissonance, usually, because it's not seen as a problem. But in contemplation, there's a lot of ambivalence. You're feeling tension. Part of you wants to change, part of you doesn't. And you're feeling the dissonance of that conflict, internal conflict.
I've heard that quote before, that ambivalence is the hallmark of change. I love that, and I am excited to hear more about it because I think it holds a lot of space for the fact that we don't necessarily just wake up one day and go, oh, yeah, I should do this. It's way more tumultuous than that.
Right.
A lot of mixing up of feelings.
And
thoughts.
how often in life do we make decisions where we're not ambivalent?
Right.
Very rarely can I make a decision that's you're 100% on board with. So to make this assumption that you're not going to have ambivalence as you make difficult decisions is, I think that's just not how it usually goes for human beings.
And we talked about that a little bit, the two of us, in our episode around courage a little while back about, the fact that oftentimes courage includes ambivalence, and people think that it's just about being 100% in on something. But
right.
No.
It's moving forward despite the ambivalence. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the next stage after that?
The next stage is preparation. So this is when you are starting to get ready for the big action phase, the next phase, where you're starting to set up your life to support the change that you're about to make. So, for example, on the motivational interviewing podcast, you're getting the floss.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. For those that haven't listened, this was a little while ago. And your sister was in the studio talking to you about your relationship to flossing or lack thereof.
Right. So I wanted to make sure I had all the right flosses.
Like all the materials ready.
Right.
And
you want to
waiting.
just have your life set up to support this preparation phase is just all about getting all the things that will support this change that you're about to make. Mm-hmm. And then the next stage, the fourth phase, is action. And this is where you actually make the behavior change. And for all of you who have been wondering, I did change my flossing behavior.
Whoa.
And that night was action mode, and it has been ever since.
The night of the podcast?
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I know. Like the intensity of this. I know.
The motivational interviewing that day really changed me and this behavior. And I would say I'm in the final phase at this point.
And what is the final phase?
It's maintenance.
Okay.
Right? Where you've already made the change, but your commitment is continuing. I would say I'm in maintenance on flossing. I think I'm going to be a flosser for life, probably.
What do you mean by maintenance? What does that entail?
It means kind of continuing to do the new behavior and setting up your life to keep it a-going, the change.
As a very infrequent flosser, I am curious about that a little bit more, just in terms of like, okay, so you set up the behavior in some way for success by buying all the floss, and now you're in the action and you're doing it, and now you're preparing. Is this just like a sort of Amazon subscription to the floss that just keeps coming, or like what? It just like starts working? You just do it now?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think what happened is that day of that podcast with my sister, I was just had such a readiness to make a change. And having that little bump, that little push of the motivational interviewing really pushed me into this action phase quite easily because of all the work I'd been doing up to that moment. And then now with the maintenance phase, it's sort of rewarding, or it's just sort of like what I do.
Julie, do you have some changes in mind in your life that you can recognize in any of these stages?
I can. I think in this conversation, I'm recognizing the hard work of change. I think that any change I have to make now is going to take continual, like cycling somewhat through this action and maintenance and like staying in that active change phase, because I feel like I'm old enough that habits have been formed that I'm like, as change happens, I'm going to have to keep working at doing something different.
Anything in mind in particular?
I think I could just do a general term of self-care.
Okay.
Just taking care of myself. That's a hard thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Julie, it sounds kind of like a hopeless a bit. Like you're always going to have to work at it, and
yeah. So then, therefore, maybe not start the process.
And I might exactly. That's what I hear.
It keeps me in my ambivalence.
That there wouldn't be as much motivation at hand if you think it's going to always be work. It's always going to be hard, no matter whether you do it or not. It's always going to be hard. I wonder if there is the possibility that it could just be a flow thing eventually. If you were aware of that possibility, then you might be more apt to move into the action phase.
You look so skeptical, Julie.
I know.
Why is
yes.
that?
Oh, I just see all the barriers to why that's gonna be
Can we
hard to get into flow.
It's interesting to be in relationship with
Oh no.
Julie, sort of where you see what could potentially be for the person, but they're not yet seeing it the same way, or they never see it the same way, and kind of sitting with that tension of like, I think this would be so great for you, but it's not my life at all.
So why don't you tell me what I should change?
Yeah, I want to hear.
I mean, what feels so realistic and great?
Well,
I had a conversation like this with my mom last week too. Yeah.
Okay. See.
Well, there's a lot that I've been making a lot of changes. I've been in action mode on some things related to work and how we work and how we approach work in our daily life at Opal. And so I've been feeling the reward of making those changes. And of course, I want that for you too. Mm-hmm. But then the tension is that you may not want that for you too.
I think making changes at work feels more feasible and realistic, especially because I'm so close in relationship with you and Kara and other colleagues at Opal that also would support that. And like, I feel like there are systems in place there that could support some of those changes. I feel more hopeful about potentially having some changes there. It's maybe less hopeful when I think about like my personal outside of work hours, how I would make some changes to take care of myself outside of.
Okay.
So
You're having a harder time thinking about changes that are just on your own behalf.
Yeah.
rather than like sort of within the system of work or within the system of your family or something.
Yeah. I'm working with adults at the workplace, and I believe that the adults around me would support some of these decisions that I could make or changes I could make. Outside of work, then I'm managing young children, and that's where it's just constantly this weighing and measuring of what's actually going to have a positive impact. So that's where I get stuck, where I'm still in the ambivalence of contemplation, I think, because I can't quite see the full picture of benefit because I see the negative or the impact it has on my family and the kids that will come back to bite me.
Yeah. Right. You're in this, when you enter contemplation about it, your ambivalence is strong, sounds like, but your parenting and your presence as a parent wins out. But at work, there's more space for a change, it sounds like.
I do feel that way.
Yeah.
I can see some changes within the work environment. What I fear is that they kind of need to simultaneously change, though, because if I'm like in a different kind of mode or pace or expectation at work, I expect that if I'm not in that similar sort of pace or expectation mode in my family life, then when I come in hot from that to work, how am I going to switch gears totally? Like I don't think that's
you just
realistic.
Switch gears.
No. No. I think that like that, I don't know totally what you're talking about, but it makes sense to me that it would be difficult to switch gears. And sometimes in the ways that we want to change, there's this sense of like, it's all got to work really well for this to happen, or like all these different areas of my life need to be better in order to support the change. Or like, I mean, you start kind of having this Tetris of changes.
And that's part of my personality and temperament, that I do that Tetris thing for everything. So then I don't take the one action, which I understand that that's like part of my psychology that I have to battle when it comes to change, because I'm doing that Tetris. And I'm trying to predict the future and then being Debbie Downer about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Versus just giving it a try. Like, what if, right? And then seeing.
Yeah.
So.
I think like one of the things I like most about this inclusion of ambivalence in change is that it might allow you to be a Debbie Downer and make change at the same time. I think that that's something that impacts me. And I used to probably be a lot more emotionally driven, I think, when I was younger. And I wrote something on my desk in Sharpie when I was probably like 15 that said intent over emotion, which is like very, very intense. I know. I don't know if I would advise myself in that way now, but I remember thinking like, I want some things to change in my life. And if I feel like I need to feel a particular way about it in order to start changing some things, because I've said many times I was not that happy, I will never feel good enough to do anything. And so for me, that was actually a really helpful way to recognize like you want some things. Yeah. Your intention is to have a life that looks like X, Y, and Z, and relationships that feel good, and, you know, to leave your bed sometimes. Like, you know, start listening to the things that you desire just as much as your mood. And maybe your life will look a little different. Mm-hmm. And I, over time, got to develop into something that included the ambivalence. And yet there still could be action. I'm not necessarily great at that in the same way now. Like, I think it's easier for me to change when there's like a big change I can make. The subtler ones are still harder. But I think that it's important to be like, yeah, okay, all of this is still going to be hard, but I could make my mornings slightly more enjoyable or slightly easier, or, you know, whatever it is. And just be like, that will then maybe build into me having like a tiny bit more energy by lunch to do this other thing that I wanted to do, you know, whatever it is.
Well, I love that you pointing that out, Carter, because I think a lot of us get stuck in the contemplation phase because we're waiting to feel just the right way or our lives to be just the right arrangement. And often we're waiting for a lifetime, potentially, for that feeling of perfection, the perfect moment, the perfect feeling.
Absolutely.
Yep. One of the things that I'm hearing in this too is that I feel like I have a gap in my parenting skill to be able to manage the change that would happen if I were to do some things different and change some of our systems that would relate to me taking care of myself or taking some time for myself. Then I'm like, nope, I have to download that book or actually listen to that book that I downloaded about stop yelling at your children. That book that I bought from some random mom that like definitely advertised through my phone and Instagram and whatever. Yep, I bought that. Anyways, but I need to first do that because I need to figure out how to be a better parent before I can make a change in my whole system that will work to be rewarded. So that's I get it. Like that's not I'm not admitting that that's good. I'm just saying
I just was nodding my head because I see you doing that. You want to get prepared for action rather than just going for it and kind of trusting that you'll figure it out as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read something in The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron years ago that I had like on a Post-it note on my wall for a while. I think it was only like maybe 3 years ago. All the Post-it note said was gentle, powerful changes. And I don't remember the context entirely, but I'm sure it was about change, right? And it was such a comforting phrase to me because sometimes the like tiny thing first is the thing that's going to eventually build into the most powerful. And we want to be able to choose something that's going to go perfectly or like sort of rebuild everything. But I don't know. I think sometimes just you start where you got to start.
Yeah.
As in, you don't need to read the book yet.
I know.
Maybe you'll find something out on the other side.
Totally.
Maybe you'll be caring for yourself better so you won't yell.
Totally. Totally. Exactly. Yeah, it's embarrassing to talk about it, right? Like, I get it. I can, like, sit in it and think, that's all just ridiculous. Just try something new. It just, in the moment of it, in those moments, to make the decision, it doesn't always feel like I have that.
I would say that in listening to you about this, Julie, you're in more contemplation, maybe preparation mode with changes at work, but not kind of in preparation mode or more contemplation with life outside of work. But it sounds like there's some readiness in the workplace, the work world. So I say that because I love this model because it shows there's a lot of respect for where you are in the change process and just sort of honoring that. Like I can hear myself kind of giving Julia a hard time about this, but I also kind of respect that, hey, Julie, that's not where Julie is with this. But Julie sounds like she's maybe more in a different place with this other thing. So that's where she's at. Okay, great. Let me be a friend to her. I'm a colleague to her and support her in that place that she's maybe interested and more ready to make the change.
I think I also would want to add that, after I've just said that gentle, powerful changes are the things that sort of accumulate into long-term awesomeness. I think it feels more complicated than that to me if I'm really getting more in touch with myself. Like this idea of 6 stages as a linear process, I don't think I agree with. I can see that all 6 stages
occur.
And I also feel like some of the biggest changes in my life have been cyclical. So I maybe have gotten to maintenance and then started at the beginning again.
I think that's what I was kind of speaking to earlier of like, really?
Yeah, what does it just stays?
Don't you still have to? Yeah.
No, things that I thought were going to be like, oh, I'm doing this forever. I mean, there's really nothing that has happened. In a recent podcast, I talked about my vegetarianism and was talking about how my attunement to sort of allowing myself to change through being a vegetarian and flexing in some ways has been a really important process. But, if you're going to put sort of my decision to become a vegetarian on here, the maintenance of it isn't so like stagnant. It's not like a destination. It in and of itself has changed and I've reassessed some things. Or I've talked a lot at different times about my habit of doing morning pages or writing in the morning, also from The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I just got in a phase of doing it for like 4 months, and I haven't done it for a month. So I'm like, what? Like, I got back. I did it. I did it. And now, like, I went on a trip or two over the weekend and I'm done. Like, geez, and my intention is to continue, right? My intention is to figure out what went wrong again, or simply to just accept things go wrong. And it makes it harder when I start again. I'm out of my flow. I'm out of the rhythm. I'm out of the habit. But I know now that it's hard and it will continue to be. And I had a really great 3-year streak where I did it every day, but life has gotten more complicated and my intention is to still try.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, I like that cyclical.
It's messy. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm being so hard on myself around self-care, I could say I've done some things within the last, if I even just say 12 months or something, I could say that. Like, I would say that I have instilled some changes. Even drinking tea and finding like a beverage that I love, a morning drink, like having my London Fog. That's a total gift to me. I make an effort to do it for myself. I very rarely miss that. And that's something that even 3 years ago, I didn't have anything like that. That was something that I was going to make an effort to really. So it's it's little things, but it's then building on that in creating a bigger picture of self-care is like such a big monster, right? So it's like the little things. I do think the little things add up.
Right.
When you pick a thing, like, okay, right now this is the change I want to make. It's then going through that.
And maybe the change is the cycle.
Yeah, of
Right.
like
So
being in
then,
it.
okay. So
Yes.
because you are there for doing, 3 months out of the year you did Artist's Way. So that's trending on a change,
Yeah.
right? Because maybe the previous year you did much
None.
less than that. None. That is a change
That's
process.
change, yeah.
Yes.
And
Not being perfectionistic.
right. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. So, with my flossing, I said on the podcast, I said, 7 out of 7 days, I'm going for it. And this is going to be my life. What am I actually doing? I'm doing 5 days and I'm not hardcore about it, about 5 days on average a week of flossing. So yeah, that's the change.
Yeah. And you're a flosser,
I'm
even
not
though it's not perfect.
Right. I still consider myself, I identify as a flosser.
I feel like that's important. And I said this at the beginning of today's podcast, but change is inherent in all these different processes of relating to your body, relating to food, mental health. All of it is about change. And as much as it's inherent in just humanity, it's also something I feel like we can look at in the world. And by world, I guess I mean Earth, like the actual cycles and seasons of change that happen. And it's not linear.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's important to remember that and to go, okay, yeah, there's like layers of change that maybe build that aren't necessarily like building every single year. It doesn't mean that I'm suddenly going to get to like, 52 weeks a year that I'm writing every morning, but maybe it just fluctuates. And okay.
It's still different than before.
Right.
Okay.
It's still different from before. And I mean, I feel like this topic of change relates so much to some of the conversations we've had around identity too, that like you can be a flosser and not do it every single day. I can be a writer and not do it perfectly every day or at all for some months, but it is like still a huge part of my identity. And like those things can stay true even if the action isn't perfectly looking like, what it would say on the instruction label.
Yeah, it's I mean, clearly we're all in stages in our own processes of change in our own lives. And we're working with people who are making incredible changes in their lives every day at Opal. And it's so cool to watch people go from sometimes pre-contemplation to action in a short amount of time.
Yes.
And so we are the lucky ones who get to watch people kind of come to life. In intake, it's often they're in pre-contemplation or contemplation, usually contemplation, and then stepping into the doors of Opal, they're in action. And
serious action.
It's brave. It's brave work to behold. So
yeah.
And maybe prior to the change of deciding to do recovery, there have been a lot of actions taken that were more eating disorder focused. Like I'm going to start on Monday with this new restriction plan or diet plan of some sort, right? And so this is a different approach to maybe something they at the core was this is they're trying to tend to the same kind of emotional struggle, but in a different way by coming in to Opal.
Yes. I'm thinking still about ambivalence in the role of all of that because, having been a milieu therapist and being in meals and clients are eating, but it doesn't necessarily feel so good. Like those changes in the action maybe doesn't feel so good still. And I always appreciated so many of the conversations I got to have with clients where we'd sort of step out of the great room, step away from the table and get to talk about the process that was happening and then go back in and keep eating. Because sometimes having a space to be able to express what is feeling so wrong about what you're doing or what's hard or what's coming up or the complexity and ambivalence that's there allows forward movement again. So even within the process of change at large that could be happening in recovery, I feel like there are tiny little moments over and over and over and over again that are also holding all the ambivalence, where there's yet another food to challenge or yet another time to refrain from working out again or, like all those different things are these small actions that are going to hold a lot of tension and conflict. And yet I think with having that sort of mindset, maybe again with my like intense 15-year-old mantra of like intent over emotion, that sometimes the emotion is the emotion I think is always important. I think it's always important. But when you're in a process of change, having the intention of change, I think is such a beautiful thing to hold on to. And I think of it kind of like this nucleus at the center and then all the emotions sort of swirling around it and the intention stays maybe the same. And yet there's like a lot of different weather that's going on around it and keeping central.
Yeah. We talk a lot about making values-based decisions versus, emotion-based or anxiety or the avoidance of anxiety, right? So maybe in a way what you're saying is that you're making decisions based on what you want to get out of life versus what you might feel like on that particular day.
Right.
There's kind of an overarching goal that you're shooting for.
Right. And some days that really just includes being emotional, right? But just to put that out there too.
Yeah. Right.
That it's not always action.
Right.
Sure.
I do want to speak to that point that you just made as well, because we're making an assumption here in this conversation that change is always a good thing.
Oh.
And I think stagnation has its value too sometimes.
Oh, say more.
There are things that I wouldn't want to change about my life or that maybe others would want me to change, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And they matter to me, but maybe not to others. And people don't like that they matter to me. Or, there's I don't know. I guess I just want to make this some basic assumption in this conversation that you always should be on some sort of change process because
good point. Not necessary.
Being over-controlled, some of us are over-controlled, myself included. I always sort of have a project of some sort going on, some sort of change project going on most of my life, and I'm trying to not have a change project right now. I'm trying to my change is to not have a project.
I love that.
Which is a big dang deal for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that because that feels like a really important part of this conversation.
Yeah. And if you are in contemplation and you haven't done your preparation, it's probably not a good idea to try for action. You want to respect where you are in the change process because pushing yourself to be somewhere you're not is likely going to create a setup for a failed change process.
There's something about it, feeling forced or feeling prescriptive in that way that I think you're speaking to. And I think the reality is that some may start and embark on the change process thinking that they're going to one end and end at a different end. I feel like that happens a lot when people that enter Opal. They think they know what eating disorder recovery and what treatment is going to entail and where it's leading them. And then they get totally taken by maybe it's the health at every size approach and they didn't even know that existed. And now they're thinking about weight and health totally differently. And they're they're headed in a different direction. Or relationships, right? The emotional attunement. Maybe people are thinking something about their emotional makeup as they start Opal, and then in their process of change, they learn something new. So I just think that's an interesting thing too, of like how we start and then where we actually end in that. So,
yes. And back to the sort of the idea of cycles in life, like I think it's important to note that there are some cycles that are just sort of the dormant stage of life where there's not necessarily a lot of action that would happen, and there's not necessarily a lot of desire even. It's just sort of a kind of infertile time. Mm-hmm. And that is also normal. And it, I think, again, is about being sort of attuned to what place you're in. And like, are you actually feeling compelled to change? Do you actually feel ready to that? Or ready for that? I really like the word ambivalence. I just feel like I keep wanting to like say about like just how much I think that concept is so important, because if you can honor the fact that you're going to feel so many different ways and let yourself explore the scope of your own experience and go, I really want this change, or people are telling me that I should, but you know, a part of me wants to do that. And actually about 95% of me thinks it's really stupid. Like that is so important. Mm-hmm. And you go, okay, great. There's 5% of me that's interested in changing, not interested right now. We'll come back to that. This is not the season. I don't care. You know, like that can be really powerful in and of itself, to just own it and to be where you are.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't usually go well if you're making changes for someone else out of someone else's interests in your life. Mm-hmm. Right. If you're doing something, you're 95% sure you don't want to do it, but then you're doing it anyway.
Right.
That's
not so good.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then you don't get to have the process of like deep change. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if it's something like flossing, like you've been working on, Lexi, where if you think you should floss, like the motivational interviewing process that you did was so cool, because you got to hear sort of all the different complexities of your feeling about something that on the surface would look kind of just day-to-day, mundane life. Like floss, so just do it or don't, you know? But everything is complicated in terms of why you would want to or what the resistance is. And if you don't let yourself be like, I actually like kind of don't want to. I feel like it's stupid. Do I really buy it that this is going to impact my health? Like, do I care? You don't get to explore some of the reasons and belief systems that are underneath the surface that would maybe make you feel like you don't care that much, or you are hopeless, or you're, you know, perfectionist, or whatever is under there. So as you've been listening, maybe you have recognized yourself in any of these processes, or one stage or another. But I would just encourage you guys to listen to the ambivalence that you might have about life or changes or desires that you have in your life, and maybe start wondering about some of the complexity there for you and what that might mean in terms of some of the changes you maybe actually do desire, or some of the changes you really actually don't desire very much, and just take some time to get to explore that on your own or with somebody. Make sure you stay in touch with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Opal Food and Body. We'd love to be in touch with you there. You can also learn more about our programming and our community events at opalfoodandbody.com. If you haven't subscribed yet to the podcast, please make sure that you do. You'll stay up to date with our new releases. And if you want, you can also leave a review of the podcast. We love it when people do that. We love to hear from you guys and learn what you are enjoying about the podcast. Thank you so much to Daniel Gunther at Jackstra Cultural Center for sound engineering, to Aaron Davidson for the Appetites original music, and to Hans Anderson for editing. Join us next time. Bye.